I mentioned earlier the Kent comedian Paul Adams has worked with some really big names down the years and has done so much. And now he's published a book entitled The Diary of a Locked Down Comedian. He's here, probably powered by several cups of coffee. Paul, afternoon.
Good afternoon. You did read it.
Yeah, I did. And I'm amazed you didn't get the thing sponsored by a coffee shop.
Well, you'll learn during this interview that selling myself is the thing I can't do. At the end of this interview, people will buy many other books by many other authors, and the last one they'll think about will be mine. So if I had that kind of thought, that's brilliant. I might do that for the next book.
Well, I know you started writing a book about your late father, didn't you, about 7 years ago? How's that going, Paul?
Well, to be fair, I read Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, Born to Run, and at the end he says that took him 7 years. So I'm on schedule.
Oh, yeah. Okay, go on. We'll let you have that. We'll concede that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the book then. And by the way, it was lovely to see the late comedian and BBC Radio Kent presenter Paul James get a mention in your book.
Oh, a shiver goes up my spine as you say his name. I saw him work every Thursday in 1991 as a team star at Warner's when I was starting out. And a more generous comedian with his time and expertise I don't know that I've ever met. So, no, that was... that's knocked me sideways a little bit. He was one of those guys, wasn't he? You know better than anybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. Fabulous and much missed.
Yeah.
I remember, let's just talk a bit about your dad, because, that is obviously such a big part of your life. I saw his name scrolling up on the credits of Noel's House Party every time it was on. And I remember thinking what fun it must have been to have worked on that show. Did he enjoy his time doing that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah, I mean, he loved it. He that was his baby, really. I mean, he wrote so many things and for so many of the great comics of our land and American comics as well. He was just a genius, but he was fun to be around. So that show was fun for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of, you saw the cast every week. There was huge stars would turn up. Bea Arthur did it, and Judd Hirsch, and then you had the guys from the Bill, Graham Cole and Andrew Quinn every year. Andrew Paul every week, turning up and being the policeman at the door. It's just a fun show, wasn't it?
Yeah. And what do you remember of that time? Were you? How old would you have been?
Oh, blimey. I would love to go to the studios, but I was going to the studios with my dad from when I was about 13 or 14. So I would go, if I wasn't working, I would go. I remember one, can I tell you a quick story? I remember
go on.
My dad said Monkhouse was going to be on the show, and I hadn't met Monkhouse. I'd spoken to him on the phone. He'd been a big help to me at the start of my career, throughout my career. And it was a chance to meet him. But I was doing a show that night somewhere in Letchworth. And so I didn't want to go to the studios because it was early in my career, and I used to get nervous, and I used to get to shows really early. And this show, I was on at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, so I planned to get there sometime on the Wednesday, just to make sure that I had everything I needed. But Dad persuaded me to come into the studios, and I was standing in a circle that was Bob Monkhouse, Charlie Adams, my dad, Felix Boness, who played the stable guy on Heidi High and was maybe the greatest studio warm-up ever, and Frank Carson, everybody just telling jokes. That's what I remember. That's how lucky I was to have influences like that and access to some of the greatest comics.
Was there ever any doubt then, bearing all that in mind, Paul, that you would go into comedy?
The story, if you ask Dad, he'll tell you a different story. But Shane Ritchie was round our house all the time when he started out, and my dad was writing for him. And he had been a blue coat, and he told me about the blue coat job at Pontins, and that's the job I wanted. But you had to have a talent. I couldn't sing or dance. So Dad wrote me a few jokes, and Shane gave me a minute of his act. And I went to Pontins for my audition with Shane Ritchie, which was like going to Manchester United for a trial with David Beckham. And they gave me the job before I even did anything. And so I thought, hang on, I was going to finish school, do my A-levels. And so by the time I decided not to finish my A-levels and that my career, should have been starting, Pontins were full. So I ended up working for Warner's because I went for the same audition with Shane again. But they didn't love him as much as Pontins, so I felt like I got that job on my own. So, and ever since then, I did 3 years of that, and someone said, here, do you want to be a pro comic? I said, okay, and the gigs have, fingers crossed, have kept coming in, so I've never had a chance to get back to being a blue coat.
But down the years you've done normal jobs, haven't you? You worked for, JD's, a fruit shop in Chislehurst, and you've done your time at McDonald's. And also, this is interesting, a qualified fitness instructor. How did all that come about?
Okay, well, the McDonald's and the fruit shop jobs were just jobs because I wanted albums and books and the pocket money wouldn't stretch. So they were still jobs when I was at school. But the only proper job I've had since I've been a comic is that when I got my first house in Bromley, I was worried I wouldn't be able to afford it. So I just lost a lot of weight with a personal trainer. And he said, why don't you become a fitness instructor? And so I got the qualification because I had nothing else to do. You know, it's like as a comic, we don't do much. And then I was in, I can't remember where I was now, Mottingham Chislehurst Way. There's a gym there, and they had an open day. So I walked in looking scruffy, and they were looking for instructors, and I knew all the answers because I literally just passed the test. And then they're packing up. This is my only interview I've ever had apart from Pontins and Warners. And they said, any questions? I went, yeah, how do you feel about having the fattest fitness instructor in London working in your gym? And I don't think they could say no. And
how long did you stick that for? Was that a job you enjoyed?
I didn't. It's difficult. I enjoyed the job, but I'd never had a proper boss as an adult, and I struggled with that, if I'm honest. I struggled with being told to clean stuff that we cleaned the night before, wondering who'd used the equipment in the meantime, and stuff like that. But the actual, personal touch with people and clients and helping people, because I was an instructor that it was an achievable goal. Most instructors look like something you're never going to look like, right? I look like something you don't want to look like, so I'm an incentive.
There's a great story in the book about you working on reception, but, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Why did you write this Diary of a Lockdown Comedian? What prompted you to do it, Paul?
Well, I was spending a lot of time in lockdown in my dad's old office. I've always wanted to write, and I do write a lot. I've never really had the confidence that anybody would want to read it. So I started writing this blog, essentially. I called it a slog because that's what it felt like. And I was told to do an Instagram post every day, and that was a nightmare because I'm not really technically astute. And then I learned that if you did the Instagram post for less than a minute, you didn't have to edit it. So I just posted stuff and put it up there, and people seemed to like it. And then really, if I'm honest, it became a bit of a learning experience for the book about Dad and I. And we thought, let's see if we can get it out there. And shockingly, people really seem to like it.
And they do like it. He's absolutely right when he says he's not technically astute. This is the man who gave us the wrong dialing code for his own landline phone. Although, to be fair, I guess you don't use your landline much nowadays, do you?
Well, no, not really, no, but you'd think I'd know it. Especially something as important as this.
Yeah, hardly. So you've been a professional comedian since 1993. What sort of work did you get in the early days, Paul?
Well, that's when it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? The early days for me really was, I became the opening act of choice, I suppose, for a lot of the acts that would come over. So I got a phone call from an agent once asking if I was working Monday or Tuesday, and I said, well, shouldn't you know that? And he said, well, no, you're not, but you might be. Keep it quiet. And I ended up doing 2 nights with Stevie Wonder at the Royal Albert Hall.
No.
And then at the end of that, the guy who ran Kennedy Street Enterprises, the promoter, Danny Patesh, his name was, he said to me as I'm walking out with Wally, my agent, Wally Dent, he said, hey, Paul, you working next Friday? And I looked at Wally. He said, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I'm free. He goes, you want to come back and open for George? And rather than just saying yes, I went, George who? And he said, George Benson. I went, all right then. And that's, it sounds so complacent now, but it was a thrill to do. And I think I wasn't any good. I just think I kept to time. And when you do the opening act spot, as I'm sure you know, keeping to time, that's more important than being funny, I think.
Well, look, now you're being modest here. But how is your retentive memory? Because, I was thinking, you mentioned Bob Monkhouse earlier. He, as we know, used to write all his jokes down in books and keep a catalogue of, what he had and his material. How do you keep a check on what you have?
I do exactly the same. I do, not as well as him, to be fair. I told you the story about me being in a circle of comics with Frank Carson and all that lot of Monkhouse at the house party. Mm-hmm. That week was the week that Bob had his books stolen. You remember his ledgers were stolen?
Yes, yeah.
And I was doing a show in Bristol, and I did a joke about it. And my dad said, tell Bob your joke about him. And I was like, what, to him? No. But I told him a joke that I wrote, which is essentially a rewrite of an old joke. I said, I was arrested by the police for stealing Bob Monkhouse's joke books, but I was released, lack of evidence. Which is the old Flasher joke, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
But you have to write everything down. I had the lessons from the experts, and Monkhouse did. Another guy I met was Bob Hope, the American comic, and he had filing cabinets in his office of every show he'd ever done. So if those guys have to write stuff down, then I do. So when we came out of lockdown, I didn't really suffer like some comics are saying, I can't remember my act. I had it all written down. Not word for word, but just topics and important bits. So, yeah, I think if I was talking to any newer, younger comic, I'd say, yeah, write everything down. Keep it. Don't chuck anything.
Because your dad used to say, whatever you do, keep writing. Eventually the funny will show up, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly that, yeah. Yeah. And if you read my book, at the very end, it more or less does.
Yeah. I'm not saying you have to plough through it, but no, it is there. Persevere. I just wonder, does the...
That's a quote for the front. I'm reading Mark Radcliffe's book called Thank You for the Days, and at the very top it says, "Steal this book," and that was a quote from David Bowie. So what I'd like is persevere, Pat Marsh, on my book.
That'll do it. Do you think your dad would have been proud of the fact you finished the book? Because, I mean, you and he, to be fair, are pretty notorious for coming up with ideas and then not really following them through.
I mean, when I talk about my dad, it means everything. And I think, yeah, he would have been proud, but for sure he'd have been surprised.
What next for you? Do you think you'll complete... the book you were writing about him? Well, that should be done by Christmas, shouldn't it?
It'll be out this year. We will finish the second draft. I've done the first draft. We're editing it now. There's a couple of things I have to write that I haven't written yet. But no, that is out. And the Diary of a Lockdown Comedian showed me that I can do that. There's one on coffee that will be coming out probably the following year. and I'm happy to say that I'm finally writing for some comics now and getting the joke stuff down, which is probably what I've always wanted to do. I enjoy telling jokes, but I prefer writing jokes.
And who are you writing for?
Well, they were mostly unknowns, to be fair, and some people don't want it out. That they use writers. We're not as writer friendly, I think, as maybe the American comics. I'm probably still guilty of just sending stuff that I think is funny to comics I think can use it.
And are you still working on, putting on comedy shows? I know you put on a one at the Social Club at Cuxton near Rochester, didn't you?
Yeah, that one. Unfortunately, that one isn't coming back. Okay. There's one a tennis club in Bexley, and it's a subsidiary now. Really, a little company called Create Comedy that I put together. That is, if anyone wants a comedy show, mostly I try and do it in Kent, South East maybe. I'm happy to put together a lineup because there's nothing better for me than watching newer comics coming through. Tom Ward, wonderful comedian who I gave a few open spots to over the years, is coming to Bexley for me in May, and he was just on live at the Apollo with a stunning spot.
You came up with a pretty stunning concept as well, didn't you, called Comedy and a Curry at the White Horse?
Well, yeah, that was... I don't know if I can take the full credit for that. I used to do a show at the Bob Hope Theatre just up the road, and then they couldn't house it anymore. So the White Hart, just down the road, a lovely little pub, they said, let's what can improve a comedy more than a curry? And I think we're just looking at things that started with C. It could have been a casserole.
Well, listen, it is great to talk to you. We wish you well. If people would like to pick up a copy of the book, how do we get hold of it, Paul?
Oh, well, see, now I'm worried about giving you the website because I might get it the wrong way round. But
yeah, go on, you'll be all right.
If you go to pauladamscomedy.com/diary, you can find it there.
Brilliant. And it is so good, so entertaining, and such an insight into the life of a comedian and a comedy writer as well. Diary of a Lockdown Comedian is out now. Paul Adams from Kent is behind it. Great to talk to you, Paul. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pat. It's a pleasure.